Microsoft is going to let you fork their VS Code. They have all of MSRA. It came in he at the time, I think, a bunch of really smart AI researchers. They already have a Copilot. And they're the only company that anyone knows about that was found guilty for violating Sherman antitrust. And they're going to let you walk in, fork their VS Code, outperform their own Copilot, and make hundreds of millions of dollars. They won't ever turn you off.
So in fact, I actually think that understates the problem. I think it looked worse than that to me at the time. And like, I'm very happy to eat my words at all of this because I was obviously completely wrong. But to me, what it looked like was, like, let me get this straight. Microsoft, in addition to those things, also owns GitHub. Owns half of OpenAI. So they have all the new models that are coming to.
It has distribution into every company.
Right, they want to sell to it. Right, exactly. So they have all of that as well. They have LinkedIn. They have Azure to host it on. They have infinite money,
infinite distribution, infinite talent, infinite resource.
Right, and it's not just they'd already built Copilot. They had been building Copilot Chat, which was in beta. So they were clearly like going to go extend the thing. And so I was like, let me get this straight. You're going to fork VS Code and do exactly what their roadmap is already and sell against them. Good luck, guys. They wanted to build an extremely private messaging app that used homomorphic encryption to hide not just what you were saying to others, but when you were saying it and, to whom. And I remember my very first feedback to Arvid when he told me this idea. I think we were walking through Harvard Square, and I think I said, who's your customer, the Taliban?
In Silicon Valley, that is how companies get built, where if you were really wrong on the 3-quarter view or like 18-month view, it's really hard to build a company because you won't get traction, you will lose momentum, people leave, go to other companies, and it's almost more important to be right in the short term in terms of what you want to build. I don't know what the return is to the 300th, engineer on the problem. Probably, having 20 really, really talented people matters much more.
All right. Well, everyone, thank you so much. Sorry for the late start here. Very excited. I guess this is episode 3 of the Hidden Layer podcast. Thank you guys very much for joining.
Thank you for having us.
Do you guys want to do a quick little introduction?
Yeah, should I start?
Yeah, sure.
I'm Oskar. I'm the president at Cursor. I'm originally from Germany, and what else should I include?
Just, your background a little bit. What got you to, up until you guys met?
Maybe this is the how was the point or not? And then you realize, so also happy birthday, Dad. Thank you.
Happy birthday.
I know that your wish was always to be on a podcast.
That's right. Yeah, this is a best birthday.
Thank you very much. Yeah, exactly.
And it's from,
let's see. Well, I'm originally from Germany, from a small town. The claim to fame of that town is it had a castle where they incarcerated the Archbishop of Cologne in the 13th century, which also tells you not much has been going on.
Offended.
Yeah, exactly.
As a Francois.
Exactly. Not much has been going on there recently. And so
this is why Ben's between us.
Exactly. Wanted to kind of, sort of see the world a little bit more. Went to the US for college, which is where I met Ben. Wasn't smart enough to get into MIT, but down the road at Harvard. And then, we met through mutual friends, I think, right?
That's right.
More or less. You're doing prod at the time.
That's right. Exactly. Yeah. So, I guess my own very brief introduction. I grew up in New York. I did my undergrad at MIT, where I met Oskar, which was a similarly formative experience for myself as it was for him. And when I was in undergrad, I did a couple of things. I started this incubator called Prod, which has been involved in helping build a bunch of companies like Cursor and Mercor and Etched and Descartes and many, many others. I was actually at one point on the original founding team of Cursor, although I left very early, and to be very clear, I take no credit whatsoever for their success since that point.
We've tried to get him back multiple times, but
they have. I'm tricky. And
that's cureness.
And then for the last 3 years, I've been in this lab, Hazy, at Stanford in the PhD, mostly working on very low-level GPU systems, although I'm actually now on leave starting a new lab. But that's a story for another day.
All right. Awesome. Well, so I guess, we've had some conversation about the founding and the early days of Cursor and something like that I just found so interesting. for so many different reasons. One, the weirdness of the foundingness and all that stuff, but also the improbableness of the stepping into a red ocean, and the complete logicalness of like why this idea will never work. It's almost worse than Airbnb in some ways. I don't know if you've had investors just like mid Slurpee just walk out as they did for Brian Chesky, but tell me about that earliest formation of the idea and
Yeah, so Ben and I were both on the sidelines of that a little bit because we knew Arvid, Daman, Michael, and Swale pretty well. And at the time, I think we were both skeptical. I think, I said this earlier, but I think the ratio of, even though the co-founding team was relatively big, the ratio of competitors to team size was kind of off because you had Microsoft as the big incumbent. You had Poolside, which had raised $500 million. You had Augment Code, which had raised $100 million. You had Magic.dev, which had raised $100 million. So it had all these kind of really well-capitalized startups, and they were all trying to do the same thing. And so at the time, it felt like really improbable that Cursor would succeed in any way. And so I would always tell them, you should pivot and do something else.
I mean, I haven't heard of some of these companies in like so long. Poolside, like raise your hand if you've even have heard of these guys or used their product or anything like that. It's interesting. They were the hot thing, and then I really haven't heard of them in a hot minute.
Yeah, it was so many companies. Codium was around at the time. They had a different name at the time. Cognition was added later. But yeah, it was a very, very competitive field. And Ben and I agreed that it seemed way too competitive.
Yeah, well, so I guess a little bit first on how they got onto that path, which is its own little interesting, just a sort of, story that I got to see from Prod's point of view. So Cursor, the current founding team of 4 is the merger of 2 separate groups that both went through Prod. There was Michael and Aman and me. I kind of dragged Michael and Aman. They didn't really want to do Prod, actually. That was sort of at my urging that I kind of pushed them through it. And then there was Arvid and Swale, which became eventually the shell company and is here. They joined actually doing something completely different than code. They wanted to build an extremely private messaging app that used homomorphic encryption to hide not just what you were saying to others, but when you were saying it and, to whom. And I remember my very first feedback to Arvid when he told me this idea. I think we were walking through Harvard Square, and I think I said, "Who's your customer? The Taliban?" And I sort of stood by that in some sense, but they were obviously brilliant. I'd worked with Arvid actually my freshman year, even at MIT on Battle Code, and had a lot of fun with him. And so, you make the bet on people, not on any individual particular idea working. Michael and Aman and I spent a while wandering through the idea maze where we started sort of looking in late 2021, and we looked at whether we wanted to build like a Google Docs type competitor with AI. I actually incorporated that side of Cursor as the AI Writing Corporation, which is now subsumed as part of the broader Cursor structure. And we eventually settled on this Copilot for CAD idea, which at first I thought was a very interesting idea because I think we actually had the somewhat prescient view that Copilot would be one of the ways by which people would kind of engage with AI in many different domains. It was sort of a more natural way to pull AI into some domain that would be more difficult to kind of, redo it all from scratch. But I pretty quickly soured on CAD just because I thought the data market was very hard, and I didn't like that you sort of had to build as a plugin. There's a lot of stickiness in CAD. It's very hard to do your own product. So I said, I don't want to do it. Genuinely good luck. Like, I hope it works, but I just didn't think I was going to enjoy it.
You mentioned like Fusion 360, like the AP was the best Python built that you can work against. They were still terrible.
Exactly. So Autodesk has this product Fusion 360, which was sort of slightly more hobbyist and amateur kind of coded than like SolidWorks or CATIA at the time. SolidWorks, you write your plugins with like C# and, kind of those sorts of frameworks. Fusion 360, they let you do Python scripting. But I remember one thing that really scared me at the time, actually, this might have been like the straw that broke the camel's back for me, was that you couldn't build a keyboard listener in Fusion 360 so the idea there was going to be we either would have to put a button on the screen that was like click to autocomplete, if you're trying to replicate the magic of like Copilot for CAD, like that's not okay. We'd have to go to Autodesk and beg them and be like, hey, can you please add something that lets us build a keyboard listener in the plugin system? And I didn't want to do that either. And so I thought that was very concerning. For what it's worth, that actually was not the thing that made CAD not work. I think that they actually got basically stuck in like a scraping war with Autoshape, and they couldn't get the data that they needed to train the models. The models weren't working that well, so that's why they didn't do it. And so they all pivoted onto the code side of things. And actually, I think if my memory serves correctly, I think Arvind and Swallow actually pivoted a little bit earlier out of the encrypted messaging, which they sort of saw was not going to work, probably by like late spring or early summer. I think it was more like late summer or early fall by the time that Michael and Aman switched off of CAD, and they sort of like, just decided that they couldn't make that piece of it work. Even then, they actually had slightly different approaches, because it's another, 6 months or something before the merger actually happens, if my memory serves. Michael and Aman wanted to do it more as the VS Code fork that they ended up going with as an overall company. Arvind and Swallow had a slightly different approach, which in some ways actually thought was more flexible.
The other way around.
You think so?
They should come down here and
maybe okay. So there'll be corrections that are issued later. But I'll tell the story as best I remember. What I recall was that Arvind and Swallow wanted to do the like Bloomberg terminal for code because they wanted to sell to Jane Street, since Arvind had been planning to go to Jane Street, but then decided to do the company instead.
Yeah, I don't really remember how exactly it evolved, but eventually they merge, which I remember at the time. So the first thing is, okay, we're going to pivot to code. I said, bad idea, too competitive, don't do that. Said, interesting, we're still going to do it. And then they said, we're also going to merge the companies. I said, bad idea, too many co-founders, don't do it. Said, yeah, no, also going to do that. And so
I at least thought the merger was a good idea. I actually did support the merger at the time. So
I was sort of, the company really succeeded despite my best efforts.
I think that Wesley has such a strong stance on like 1 is bad, really bad.
Yeah.
2 is great. 3 is equally as great. 4 is really bad.
Yeah.
5 is horrible. And so like,
but they started working together really well. And then I think now looking back, I mean, it's always, one probably has to be a little bit careful with these ex post kind of explanations for why something worked. But one of the things that is interesting about how the competitive landscape has evolved since then is everyone kind of agreed in 2022 or 2023 what coding would eventually look like. So everyone was talking about agents coding and doing all of that. I mean, Cognition was very big on that, but also the other companies. The thing that differentiated all the competitors in the beginning was, what's your view of the product over the next 12 months? And so companies like Poolside and Magic, they had this very strong belief that you would have to train your own model. And they would do that by going to enterprises and training on their code bases. There was another category of companies, Codium, SourceGraph, a couple of those, that thought they should do an extension. Because, at the time people said, well, people like the IDEs, they're not going to switch, and the extension is pretty easy to adopt, and we can just deliver AI that way. And Cursor was the only one that said, we think you have to kind of build your own IDE or for VS Code and really deeply integrate AI. But that was really the differentiator. But at the time, everyone would have agreed, by the end of the decade, it will look very similar. But then the next 2-3 quarters, what do you actually do? What's your product roadmap? And I think that is actually I think in Silicon Valley, that is how companies get built, where if you're really wrong on the 3-quarter view or like 18-month view, it's really hard to build a company because you won't get traction, you will lose momentum, people leave, go to other companies. And it's almost more important to be right in the short term in terms of what you want to build. Sometimes it's much easier to say, in 5 years or in 10 years, this is where the technology ends up. The moment when this became kind of, this is a hypothesis, not exactly sure this is true, but I feel like in tech history, if you look at different founding phases of different companies, you kind of encounter this as well. I think if you read Netscape Time, or the new thing about Netscape, the founding of Netscape, it's like Tim Clark and Mark Andreessen ideating around what they wanted to build. And one of the ideas that Jim Clark has is, I want to build this entertainment home thing where like people will have these big screens and they will consume music and games and movies at home at this like kind of TV thing. This is exactly what happened with like Netflix on smart TVs and all of that. And that was in the 90s. So he had the right idea there. If you read about Max Lotchin after PayPal starting Slide, it reads like a complete description of Instagram, but then the details really matters, and you probably didn't get it quite right, but you read that and you think it's totally prescient, like that's exactly what happened with social media. So the overall point just being 10 years down the road, sometimes easier to identify than what you need to do in the short term, but short term is much more important for kind of the company.
Yeah. Especially for a startup. You need that early momentum, that early success, give the early investors enough conviction to shuttle you to the bigger investors that they know that are looking, and once you get that momentum, then especially on the revenue side too, there's conviction, everyone's excited, they work harder, not less hard.
Yeah.
And tribal knowledge once lost is like hard to ever get back if people leave, and especially in Silicon Valley. So a sane person would, as both of you said, Microsoft is going to let you fork their VS Code. They have all of MSRA. It came in he at the time, I think, a bunch of really smart AI researchers. They already have a Copilot. And they're the only company that anyone knows about that was found guilty for violating Sherman antitrust. And they're going to let you walk in, fork their VS Code, outperform their own Copilot, and make hundreds of millions of dollars. They won't ever turn you off.
So in fact, I actually think that understates the problem. I think it looked worse than that to me at the time. And like, I'm very happy to eat my words at all of this because I was obviously completely wrong. But to me, what it looked like was, like, let me get this straight. Microsoft, in addition to those things, also owns GitHub. It owns half of OpenAI. So they have all the new models that are coming to.
It has distribution into every company.
Right, they would want to sell to you.
Right.
Exactly. So they have all of that as well. They have LinkedIn, they have Azure to host it on, they have infinite money.
Infinite distribution, infinite talent, infinite resource.
Right. And it's not just they'd already built Copilot. They had been building Copilot Chat, which was in beta. So they were clearly like going to go extend the thing. And so, yeah, I was like, let me get this straight. You're going to fork VS Code and do exactly what their roadmap is already and sell against them. Good luck, guys. That was sort of my attitude. And I do think one thing that's actually underappreciated in the story, and this is, I think, actually a good case for startups, is the ability to concentrate talent, and actually also the ability to just do the right diligence on, particular competitors. Because I think there is one sense in which, and part of the way that we're talking about this right now, it gives the sense that like competitors are very abstract of like for these companies, and you're hoping that some will be better, some will be worse. You're hoping you'll be the best one. But I think one thing people understand is you can actually go look at your competitors and figure out whether or not you're going to be better than them. And I think in the case of Cursor, I think that there was actually some kind of intel at the time that even getting Copilot out from Microsoft for VS Code was actually a huge like internal political battle, and like Microsoft did not support that very well. And that the team at VS Code was actually not that large and was frankly not that bought in. And that I think Cursor had a tremendous opportunity that they realized to just concentrate a lot of talent on the problem in a way that is very hard for big companies to do. It's surely true that Microsoft, if it had, gone all in on coding, I think they probably could have won the thing if they had said, we're going to put all of our best people and all of the money and give it away for free for 10 years, whatever. They probably could have made it very hard for anyone else to compete. But they didn't. They had, 1,000 other things going on.
Right.
And I think the benefit here is to sort of see the market that is growing and then concentrate tons and tons of talent on it. And I think that's something that people missed, was actually the fact that you could just go look at what were they practically going to do. They weren't going to do it.
What do you think?
I mean, I don't know. I think again, like sort of after the fact, it's easy to find all these explanations kind of in prospect. When you're there, doesn't seem that obvious. I think what Ben is saying is right. I also think that the faster the technology is evolving that you're kind of dealing with and that you're building a product around, the more just having a small, very talented group matters that can move fast. And Microsoft was just, a really big team. I don't know what the return is to the 300th, engineer on the problem. Probably having 20 really, really talented people matters much more.
Right.
And that's probably a lot of it. And then you still left with this question, why didn't the other companies work? And I think it comes largely down to the, how are you actually going about solving this problem? And so there are the different approaches. Some of them were more right than others. But
how did you get to that point where you were so right on the form factor? There was lots of people that were doing the sweet bench stuff where like on git commit is when, or like on the issue from the CSM, whatever customer support thing you have when you have the issue is when all the LLMs will run, and then and that one makes so much sense because now my developer grabs the ticket and then I already have like I'm just kind of a reviewer, like I'm kind of merging. Like that was one use case, but you guys chose a much different entry point. And why do you have conviction on that entry point?
Well, we had like this, Cursor tab was kind of the thing that really worked in Cursor. I don't know whether you guys used Cursor back then, but Cursor tab, you can still use Cursor tab. Now it's no longer the most used feature, it's the agent. But for a long time, Cursor was just Cursor tab, and Cursor tab was code completion. Next couple of lines as you're typing. I think one of the things that's underappreciated when you think about how good a product is or how quickly it will get adopted is sometimes it's actually not the feature that is the most useful kind of in the absolute that is most important. It's actually the feature that delivers the most value most quickly. And so with tab, if you were just coming from VS Code and you now use Cursor, it was an immediate improvement over VS Code and was very intuitive, even though maybe the agent is more powerful, but it takes a little bit longer to get that to work. Tab was it made Cursor strictly better immediately.
And also the models had to grow with you. Like the models weren't that good.
They weren't that good.
2021, 2022.
Couldn't have done the sort of the agent type coding that people do now, but I think this is an underappreciated thing. It's also a failure mode for startups sometimes where they say, but if the user was smarter, they could use the product and it delivers all this value. Well, the absolute value delivery is not actually what matters as much. It's kind of how much value can you deliver at kind of what cost to the user. And if it's really intuitive and really easy to understand that this thing's going to be helpful, you adopt it very quickly. And I think that led to this amazing adoption that we saw with Cursor.
What did you think was going to happen when you actually launched it and had, people be able to sign up, swipe their credit card, like you actually launched it? What did you think was going to happen and what actually happened?
I don't think there was I don't think it was, first of all, like one moment in time where like it was released and then people had these expectations. I think it was kind of chipping away. You would release things and more people would use it. I think one of the things that we were slow to was the go-to-market and the sales. We only started doing sales once the market really pulled us into the enterprise. I told the story before. You would go, even the summer of last year, you would go and read the Cursor, hello or hi at Cursor emails that people would send you. And so it would be people, oh, this thing's broken, can you fix it? But then you'd find an email saying something like, I'm like the CTO of, making this up, but like the CTO of Slack, and I'm using Cursor, and I want to roll it out to all of Slack. Can you get on the phone? And like, we wouldn't see the email. And then the guy would follow up, hey, like, would really like to use it. Can you get on the phone? Nothing. Hey guys, are you monitoring this? Literally, I can find the email for you. Are you monitoring this email? And at which point, we had this colleague in the Philippines who would like give us support tickets. He would respond, not interested, no period. And not even that was sufficient to get us to do go to market. It took another 6 months or something for us to really start doing it. So I think for a very long time, we were just very focused on the product and building the product, and the adoption was something that wasn't as salient. Yeah. I think people just had this idea, if it was going to, if it's useful to us, it can be useful to other people.
Yeah. And you guys have such a benefit where it's the same thing was true if you ever read the book Software about Oracle. Larry Ellison was prescient enough to say the entire company needs to run on Oracle. And we're not doing this thing where we have 50 separate instances of Oracle. We're going to have one instance of Oracle that ran all of Oracle and it's gonna be the best sales tool, but also the best dog fooding. And so like every single person at Oracle knew when there was a bug well before the customers. And so, tell me about the benefits, I guess, of that dog fooding and what's actually a problem.
Well, when one reads the history of Oracle, one wonders whether that was, they always dog fooded it to all of the company. Because, I think it was sometimes some delta between what they wanted the product to be and how it worked. But Michael talks about this sometimes, where he says that he wants Cursor to be a very IC kind of centric company. I think that is very much true. Like Stuart is nodding. I think that is true. And the reason for this is if you are both the person who's building the thing, but also using the thing, you have a really good idea of how you can improve it. I think in companies where the engineers are divorced from the product, you get really top-down hierarchical companies that really rely on product management. You need to have that. At Cursor, it's kind of the opposite, where the people that are building the product are also the people using the product. They're the ICPs. And so you want to give people a lot of room to kind of experiment and have ideas of how to build things. That's actually the only way that you can run it. And so as a result, Cursor there's obviously some organizational structure, but it's not, 14 layers of management and people kind of dictating the roadmap. In fact, people are shocked when they join Cursor. They're like, how do we know what to build? It's like, well, have ideas, and then you go execute on that. Yep.
You guys just recently launched your own model.
Yep.
Tell me about the decision. Why build your own model? Why get into the model building business?
Well, we've always built our own models. I mean, we started with Cursor Tab, which was very much kind of what got Cursor started. And Cursor Tab is now at a point where people find it to be much better than any other code completion out there. And there's a bunch of learnings we had from that. And we always wanted to do kind of an agent model. Was just a matter of kind of learning how to do that and building research capabilities in that direction. And if you use Composer, it's much faster than the other models that are out there. And so, yeah, we've kind of been applying the learnings from Tab to this new type of model, and yeah, hope that this is very much kind of a starting point. And I think the model is pretty useful, but it can get much better. And so, over the next couple of years, hopefully we can improve.
So last Cursor question, then I want to up level to broader things. The lines are really blurring. And like, I can only imagine from your standpoint, like it's really unclear who's a friendly, who's a competitor, who's like partner, who's foe. And like, there's model companies, which you use sometimes.
I hope you don't start competing with this.
It's like, yeah, the ground is shifting so quickly. Do you view the model companies to be competitive now? Do you think that there is room for partnership in the ensemble layer? Do you think that Lovable, and those more like downstream folks, full replit and stuff is competitive? Where do you draw the lines of like your friend, your foe?
Oh, I mean, we've always had competitors, and I think it's the world's not crazy enough to give you kind of a huge opportunity and then like say, okay, but there's going to be no one else who's discovered this, right? In some sense, it's going to sound a little bit outlandish, but if you think about how competitive something is as the difference between where you are and where everyone else is, maybe in some ways it's actually much less competitive now for us than it was 2-3 years ago, when it was like, a couple of people in an apartment and all these competitors around you. That being said, obviously, we are we are Anthropic, OpenAI. We've been using their models. We're using their models. We're going to continue to use their models, and they've been great partners to us. They obviously have an interest in also figuring out whether they have some product offering around coding, and I think we have to be fine with that. And so far, they have navigated that really well, where nothing unfair or anything like that has happened. And if other people are better able to build a product around it, then, who are you to sort of complain about that? Right? Should be sort of competing on the product level. That being said, we do wonder sometimes why not more things have worked in AI. And we wish if there were like 14 other use cases, maybe not everyone would have to do coding. Like the Sora thing, that looks great. You guys should all use it much more.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, I definitely experienced that. There was kind of like, weird 2017, 2018, where like there was a whole bunch of interest in AI after AlexNet, and then everyone raised big rounds, and then there was like nothing to be done. And then there was like a whole bunch of companies that pivoted into anyone making money, and like
Yeah.
they making money, we can go do that. And
Yeah.
like that's kind of like this like kind of compression to these like nearest neighbors kind
Yeah.
of thing that happens. So that's a good question. I see, infinite amounts of cursor for X playbook, which sometimes is really hard to parse. Like we're cursor for space, and it's just like, what does that even mean? Like I don't know how to parse that. I guess one direction that questions to be asked is like, where do you, if you weren't doing cursor, where do you see the best? Like there was a playbook that was invented with cursor. That's what that sentence implies. We're doing that playbook for X. What are the applications that you're the most excited about if you weren't doing cursor that you would go after?
I don't really know, to be honest. I also don't know how much of a playbook it really is. I think I don't really know half the time when people say cursor for something, what it really means. So yeah, I don't have a good sense, but as someone who's just starting it, kind of, yeah.
Well, I would say I'm definitely not doing a cursor for X playbook, but I'm happy to try to interrogate the cursor for X playbook anyways.
Sure, yeah.
I mean, so maybe it's worth taking a moment to look at what made the cursor, what made code such a good market to go after in the first place. Then maybe if we can identify a little bit of that, we can try to extrapolate that onto other markets. So to me, there were a couple of things that made code particularly appealing. First one is that tons of data is available on the internet, much thanks to the open source community over the last, 50 years that has made that possible. So the models are actually pretty good at writing code even to begin with, and there's, some reasonable proxy to believe that will continue to improve. Second thing is that I think it's also kind of from a product point of view, code is well suited for autoregressive language modeling, that you're going to, like, the text is the product. And so, there's no complicated UIs you necessarily have to navigate in order to do anything of value. If you can write good code, the model, the product can be thought. I think the third thing here, actually maybe we'll give it for a fourth thing as well, but the third thing I'd say is that code is also an extremely valuable domain, in that software engineers are paid a ton of money. Their work is considered important by many of the companies that employ them. So there's great incentives to make them more productive.
Yeah, there's businesses that are funded after making engineers like 5% faster.
Right, exactly.
Like that's more than enough, let alone 50% faster.
And then maybe the fourth thing I'll give, which maybe is part of, if you want to identify a specific cursor playbook here, is to me really kind of the product-led motion for it. I think this is something where developers are also probably unusually friendly, because developers all sit next to each other and they see what tools they're using and they exchange, oh, I liked this, particular terminal color or whatever. I like this. So you get very nice word of mouth properties, I think, on developers that are actually different from many other markets, because developers will actually say, oh, have you tried cursor yet? To their friends. And many other markets do not have that same dynamic where people will spread it automatically. Yeah. Developers are also, because they're somewhat highly paid, they're a little bit more willing to pay for the tools that they like than others. So developers are kind of a unique market in that particular respect, which is, I think, part of what makes it hard to replicate the particular cursor playbook in other domains. But I mean, if I were to look at these overall qualities, it's like, okay, where is there a lot of data? Where is it a valuable domain? Where is a lot of it done in text form? I think some of the clear things are probably around any kind of writing and communication management. Those things seem very ripe for it. I think the data is not quite there, but I think these things will probably come over time. Maybe we need more work on the context side in order to do management effectively. So that seems possible to me. How do you get the PLG motion? That's less clear to me. I think that's something that is pretty distinguished in cursor. And if you ask me, will there be other markets that will work with AI? I would say, yeah, I think so. If you ask me, will they really look like they follow the cursor playbook? My read is actually probably not. That they're probably going to be much more enterprise focused and take a more standard sales led approach.
The virality of like bottoms up sales or product led motion to programmers, and like how much, like how we share always like what we're doing. Like in lab, we always talk about like who's really using Plug Code well, like how are you doing this? How you have Codex, how you using cursor, how you using all these things. We're talking about it all the time. And like, we're happy to share those things. There's like some, like, I don't think authors like each other. It's like, like they definitely don't want to share what they're doing. Right. And let alone that hey, I didn't even write this. I use AI to write this. They're definitely not, so it's kind of an interesting, the K factor of software.
Actually, the last thing you also said is also very interesting, that I think software engineers are very willing to use technology to improve their field. I think, for example, one interesting problem one runs into when tries to do legal work, for example, is that lawyers are, broadly speaking, humanities majors who are proud of their writing, and they like their writing, and they think it's one of the things that distinguishes their skill is their craft here as good artisanal writers. So if you say, hey, I'm gonna, you won't have to do any more writing, I'll come and automate it. You just have to do, all the discovery piece or whatever, like, they don't like that. They actually, that's their favorite part of the job, is to do the good writing. They, it's like taking the soul out of the profession.
Oh, it's for sure. I mean, yeah, I there's this company called Solve Intelligence that I love, and they basically do automation for patent writing, and that's claims writing. I've written a lot of patents, something like that. Like, claims writing is something that like these patent attorneys love doing, and like now you're going to automate that. That's not a good thing that you just automated the thing that I love. Like coding. I don't know if I love coding. I love the result of the
A lot of
coding.
people do love coding.
I mean, there's fun challenges. Like I don't like dealing with like some React messiness bug, and like I like some like Towers of Hanoi like challenge mental puzzle, because I like puzzles, but like I don't like love mucking through this arcane barrier condition issue in
They have a
PyTorch.
package to use.
Yeah, and it's like, so there's definitely some parts that are fun, some parts that aren't. But yeah, it's a really interesting that it's nuanced to coding, which is why it was so viral. I hadn't thought about that. So upclicking, I guess, to like even broader like market level stuff. There's a lot of stuff going on with AI. You're hearing all about AGI this, AGI that. You had some kind of
this lab is very close to AGI.
Yeah, we have a lot of discussions about it as well. I mean, there's something that you said about the East Bay.
Oh my God.
That
Yeah, I can't repeat that.
okay, we can ignore the less wrong community. But there's some cool thing you said about the frenzy definition, and there was some book that you're like,
Yeah, you can
look at that.
Well, so about a year ago, Oskar and I were on vacation together, as we often do, and Oskar introduced me to this book of a bunch of Brian Kaplan's essays, and one of the essays, I'll probably butcher the exact terminology he used, but kind of the gist of this was that the way that you should know whether you're in sort of a mania or a frenzy of some kind is whether or not you are sort of allowed to ask, like, well, how big is it? How bad is it? Like, what's the scale? What's a proportionate calibrated response? And I think, I mean, I'll try not to get too far into this, but for example, for those of us who have lived through, the COVID era, which I think is most, everyone in this room, like, I think PhD students
are getting younger and younger.
It's true. Yeah. It's, I don't know who's watching this podcast, but, there was definitely a sense of a little bit of that frenzy where like you couldn't quite ask like, how bad is it? Even if the answer was very bad, like, it's just asking the question was sort of considered in poor form. And so I think there was kind of an analogous issue with most of the definitions for kind of the broader AGI, and maybe this is more relevant now to kind of, closing the gap, like kind of theme here is, it's, how big is AGI? Well, it's infinity big. You can't ask that question.
So I think if you can't have a conversation around specifics,
Quantifying it.
or if you have a question, if you ask, if you try to quantify, if you ask, is this reasonable? Is this not reasonable? If people are not willing to engage in that, you're probably gonna get it wrong too.
Of course you're gonna get it wrong.
Because
you can't apply science in a really clean way on it.
Bigger than this, smaller than that, we think. Right. And the weird thing about AGI is that it is such an amorphous term. And I think that is also kind of where we are a little bit different ideologically, where we very much believe that, AI is this tool. It should be a tool for us that we use to make, what we do in our work easier or better, and we want to apply to something specific. So like a specific idea. There is something weird about kind of building something where you're saying, well, we're just sort of seeing where it leads us. We're just doing this research, these general models, and maybe it'll kill us all, but we don't really know how it's going to happen or what it's going to do exactly. I think there's some of that going on. Obviously, people have ideas of what they want to do, but
yeah.
So if I'm gonna, maybe I'll try to actually offer a somewhat cogent distinction between the infinity and the non-infinity, which is to say that I will choose to make definitions here that the super intelligent stuff we'll define as the infinity piece, and the general intelligence stuff will define more as Oscar's saying, let's use AI in broad ways in the economy that make our lives better and, help us do the work that we want to do. I think it's been interesting to see AGI kind of descoped a little bit in this form, because it used to maybe also mean the infinity piece too. But I actually think that this has been appropriate. One thing I'm particularly intrigued by, if we look at the trajectory of the last couple of years, is that I think there was this pretty brief window kind of after ChatGPT where there was a tremendous excitement about, hey, how fast is this really going to go? Like, what are the timelines, the takeoffs, whatever you want to call them, that people had. I visited OpenAI in late 2023 because they were also trying to recruit me at one point. And they like sat us around some table and like all went through the timelines. And to my actual shock at the point, the latest timeline of anyone other than myself at the table was like early 2026. And they were like, oh yeah, like humans will be obsolete in 2026. Okay,
EMOD saying that there's gonna be no coders in 18 months or whatever it was. It was like some remarkably short time frame like that.
Exactly. And, to some degree, I don't think it was entirely unwarranted for parts of that where, I think there was an interesting scaling hypothesis that could have come through. It was sort of like, well, GPT-3 with 175 billion parameters, was such a huge leap over the previous ones. We don't know what happens if you train a 10 trillion parameter model off of all of the world's data. Maybe it really, discovers things that humans fundamentally don't know.
Yeah.
I think at this point, it looks like on the current paradigms, we are not on track to get that. And that I think it will look much more like, what Oskar is saying, that will be things that simply improve the way that we do the work that we do. And as I said, get smarter. That said, I think it's also possible that simply our paradigms are wrong, and that if we built like fundamentally smarter systems that work differently from the current paradigm, maybe you'd get different scaling laws that have, like actually lead more in the AI refactors the whole economy and takes over the world kind of perspective. That'd be cool too.
I do think that it's such like a problematic thing. Like Sam kind of talks about, we're really bad at estimating, like visualizing and thinking about exponentials, and similarly logarithms. And it's like almost trying to predict when AGI will occur. But, and again, we have to define it, which some people have actually taken stabs at, which are very bold. And I appreciate that. There's the new Eric Schmidt paper that they released that actually gives an CHC pedagogy based version of a definition of AGI, which I think ChatGPT is 57% AGI, whatever, which probably means it's a bad measure, in my opinion. This tells me more about the measure than it does about ChatGPT 5. But, there's, all these, and it's like, if I were Thomas Edison, we go back to Thomas Edison, I don't know how many tries of the light bulb he had, but like, let's just go T-4 of those. And you said, okay, based on the trend here, predict how many more. It's an aleatoric exercise. There is no information in any of the experiments you've done. Maybe if you're permuting all of the possible instantiations would be infinite. Like, okay, maybe there's some information that like, I'm running out of cards in the deck, so that like I must eventually be able to narrow in on, I get more probability, but it doesn't actually help you. I think like it bothered me a little bit, this Andre Carpathy saying, 10 years. I don't know. Like, and it's just like, why? It's aleatoric. Like we don't know all the things that we don't even know yet. And that's actually back to the definition, where like there's so many, if you define AGI, which is my favorite definition of like, here's the set of all things that humans can do, there must not be one that AGI can do better. This AI algorithm, the same algorithm, cannot do better. That's my definition. And like, that's like an infinite list of things that we can test. And so it's going to be a bit like gravity. We're like, okay, does gravity work here? Yeah, it works. Does it work over here? Yeah, it works. Like, you don't have to test it everywhere, but like you can start to get like a sense. These dynamic benchmarks, these static benchmarks, like it's just, the static benchmarks are kind of useless. There's always ways to game it. And this is where I like Cholet's stuff the most, where he's actually normalizing by prior experience. And it's how much you generalize from a specific data set to a new task and things like that. There's a bunch of stuff on you mentioned like where are we so apart? Where is the gap? On how would you even quantify it? The two biggest metrics we're way off on. Number one is intelligence per watt, which this lab is talking a lot about, which I would love to, double click into. And it's sample complexity. How many samples for us to achieve saturation, 100% accuracy? And we are like, humans get, and this is the ArcAGI 2 at least, where it's like humans are at 99% with like 2 examples, maybe even 1 example. We can get to 100%. And the state of the art, I think, is Grok at like 30%. And so we're still, and GPT-5 is like 15%. And so like we're still way off. And also they burn like 6 gallons of water to get there. Like that's how much, joules they just burn to get there. So I guess talk about those things. How do you guys think about those things?
Well, I have a question for you guys. Like, how if you just think about you're talking about how much it costs to run these models and to achieve that, how much electricity and so on. What do you think at the limit in 5 years or something will the price per token be? Like, how much will it come down?
I think that's like actual
What actually
attractable. That's attractable.
Like off the number?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be like 10 to the minus 50 or something. Like, I think it's going to get remarkably cheap. I think the models will only get more intelligent per watt. So that trend will continue to happen. And as long as Jensen is alive and CEO of NVIDIA, he'll make those things more efficient. And like, I don't know how true it is, but Satya has these like GPUs that like are sitting idle because he can't even get the power. And like the implications on inflation of, because we can't bring on that much more gigawatts per annum. So like the implications on this is like, it will be such a downward pressure to solve the power problem.
Okay, so I actually have a completely different take on this.
Really? Yeah.
Yes. And it's funny because I said I was going to talk about my new lab, but I'm still not going to say much, but I will say that the sample and complexity one is very much, that's kind of what we're doing. Okay. So we're very interested in that.
But that's a generalization issue. That's not necessarily about intelligence per watt.
Correct. So I have different answers. So I actually think that intelligence per watt, my own assessment is that it's actually, I think, somewhat overstated in the short term, although it may be understated in the long term. Right now, everyone looks at it and says, oh, we can't get the power to turn on the GPUs. And I mean, we've talked a little bit about this before, but my view on this is basically just actually a timescale mismatch where you're buying GPUs and depreciating them on 3 to 5 year timelines, and you buy a nuclear power plant and depreciate on a 40-year timeline. So you're like, oh, well, this looks really, really bad on it. But actually, when you account for the fact that nuclear power plant is going to produce power basically for free once it's constructed, the capital construction is about 70% of the lifetime cost of a nuclear power plant. So nearly for free for the next 40 years. And it likes to be run at full power constantly. That's how nuclear power operates. It wants to be used as baseline load, which is exactly what GPUs want. When you add those two things up, I sort of look like, no, it'll be fine. And part of my evidence on this point is that if you look at where power is for data centers in the US overall right now, we're currently sitting, I think, at maybe 2 to 3% of US power is being used for data centers. Even with the gigantic scale of the current build out over the next 5 years, you can't realistically get above about 7 to 8%. So is that a lot? Yes, 5% of US power consumption is actually a big difference. And part of the reason why this is so painful is we haven't built any power in like 30 years. So our supply chains suck for like going and getting new transformers and building new turbines and all that. So we have to go sort all
Even worse, we're decommissioning nuclear power plants all of it.
Yeah, we shouldn't be there. Indian Point was the stupidest thing ever. The Yellow Canyon drives me nuts. So don't get me started on this particular thing. So our supply chains are not super well set up for this. And as a result, like it is bottlenecking in the short term. It's going to cause a lot of heartache. Now, I do think it potentially becomes a problem in the long term where if you think the exponential continues to go for like 15 years, and now all of a sudden you're at, 70% of power is being used for AI as opposed to, 7%. Well, okay, then that's a somewhat different story. And then, okay, we need to go start building our Dyson sphere. So like, that all sounds fine to me. But I'm actually less anxious about it in the near term because to me, it looks very bad when you're actually building the data center and you base it to price and, some amount of risk on the future of it. The other thing is you're also talking about Jensen. I don't think Jensen's going to save you here. The reason I don't think Jensen's going to save you here is that I look at a B200 and I see 2 H100s that have been, approximately speaking, stapled together. And there's
I mean, that's like a time to market thing. Like it worked, and then so you stack it together, and it kind of works too. And
yeah, like so
I want to beat AMD. I want to some more of these things. And
right, they're getting a little better on flops per watt. Most of the tricks there. I mean, okay, so if you look at how NVIDIA has squeezed actual juice out of, on the energy side over the last, let's say 15 years, because we can actually go by 15 years. So, and I'll compare to a CPU. So a CPU spends about, even doing like an in32 add instruction register, spends greater than 99% of the energy on like register file access, like instruction decoding, the controls, all those sorts of things are going to it. Only about 0.7% goes to the actual in32 addition that's actually happening.
The arithmetic logic, yeah.
Okay, so now you move to a GPU and you say, let's have 32 wide SIMD units instead, so we'll amortize that. Well, it turns out that the warp scheduler makes things a bit more complicated. So you don't get a full factor of 32, but you get to somewhere where like now you're at like 5% of the energy is being used the way you want. Okay, so then you go and you add in the tensor cores. The tensor cores give you another factor of about 15 there, because once you start to run big tensor core operations, in fact, on Blackball, these are quite big. You can run millions of flops on a single instruction. You can now get to a point where you're basically amortizing that the control flow is like, essentially negligible and you're spending 100% there. So I think actually on previous generations, it would have been like you were still spending maybe 1.3x or something was overhead. Now I think you're probably pretty close to 1x on overhead there. You still spend about half your power on memory movement. Maybe there's something to do there. Actually, there's probably something to do there. HBM is hugely expensive from a power perspective because you're refreshing these cells all the time. So there's still more there. The next thing that you do is you reduce precision, and we've done that quite aggressively. So in general, the multiplier is quadratic in the size of the mantissa. So when you go down from FP32 to FP8, you get yourself approximately 16x savings on it. We're now at these like weird MXFP4 type formats, which like seem fine.
But we're not going to FP1.
It doesn't look to me like we're going much further at MXFP4.
FP4 seems like the best we're going to get.
Right. We probably squeezed that juice is sort of my view.
Yeah. And that my argument wouldn't be that I will make some argument that Jensen is on minimized TCO and part of TCO's power. And so like he took a lot of these.
Let's think of a factor though. So if I take an H100, I'll just use as a number because it's easy. So H100 costs, let's say it used to cost, $25,000 per chip or something of that order. Buying in bulk, it was 30,000 if it was the list price, but let's say it's 25. So to consume 700 watts, data center power supplies are generally considered at 10 cents per kilowatt hour. So you do it out and you discover that you're spending something $500 a year on power. So if your depreciation schedule is 5 years, which is like, by the way, also a very long time in silicon, because you used to use 3-year schedules for depreciation there. Even a 5-year timeline, you're at $2,500 on power overall. It's like 10% of the overall lifetime cost. It's mostly CapEx on the GPU.
Interesting. So, but I still wouldn't even wouldn't be the bulk of my argument. My argument is be that all the people in this room are maximizing intelligence per flop. And so if S4 is a suitable alternative, or some other architecture that we have yet to discover is a suitable alternative or tweak on exponentiation, and we don't have to spend so much of the flops on exponentiation, and we can figure out how to linearize attention and get that to be just as performant, then you've dramatically you get more intelligence per flop.
I'm still going to give you a maybe here. I'm sorry. I'm going to be very difficult here. But so, okay, let's do it the flops for brains. Just because it's an interesting calculation. So about 100 trillion synapses in an adult brain, about 4 hertz for the overall frequency of the brain. It's like these are the right order of magnitude. So 400 trillion synapses per second. Now, the question is, how many flops should we consider each synapse firing as? My claim is that it's probably greater than 1. It's probably no more than about 10. The ways that you get to about 10 as the number, you have some amount of gating in the dendritic arbor. So you can get a couple from that. There's obviously a multiply add that's happening in the way that the accumulation is happening. So at least if we normalize this now, we calculate flops normally, which maybe we shouldn't do it the way we do, but it's just to make it all consistent. The other thing you also get is you have sparsity in the brain. And the sparsity is something like, let's say 250 to 1 sparsity on the grounds that neurons can distinguish spikes that are about a millisecond apart from each other. Like that's roughly the time resolution here. So if you think that you're at, I'm actually being aggressive. 250 is maybe optimistic, but I'll say it. So you get sort of a logarithmic gain with the sparsity as well in terms of the amount of information content, because you basically transition slowly into a time-based code from basically like a clock-based code. So you put a log on that, you get another factor of like, 5 to 10 at most on that. So my read is like, maybe it's 5 flops for, maybe it's 20, but it's probably an order of 10. So you add that up and you're like, okay, the brain is probably somewhere between 1 and 10 petaflops would be my assessment. If you think there's other like weird quantum things that are happening, then these numbers potentially change. I don't think there are, but like nobody really knows. I want to put all the appropriate disclaimers there. So I actually think we're kind of in the right ballpark now, where, a B200 and FP8 is like kind of the same order. I mean, we're still a lot more power.
We're 20 watt versus 1,000.
And I think we're not exactly. And so where that really comes in is just that we actually have much more efficient hardware at the bottom. Like it's not actually necessarily, hardware might be more efficient as well, but the big gap there is that we're still about 50x off in terms of power per flop. A neuron does not seem like that efficient of a thing, but it has a couple of things going for it. It runs at very low voltages, 0.07 volts. You get generally like the squared term in power consumption there. You also have another nice aspect, which is that like the actual synapse itself that's doing the multiply adds, like like you would think that a neuron is bad because it's a gigantic hulking thing, but it does something like 10,000 flops in the picojoule or something. It's like stupid how efficient they are.
The argument is that we need to get off of 1 Neumann. Is that what you're saying?
Or at least off of standard digital transistors running on like CMOS with silicon. Like I think it's probably hard to get. And there's some folks that want to do this. There's like Naveen's new thing, unconventional. Let's try.
And that's actually my best. That's why I think 10 to the minus 50, especially if we already have something that works. And like, there's a lot of bets that Jensen won't take that are even narrowing, getting away from general purpose. And like, yeah, I can't do gem calls, but like I can do transformers extremely well. And Cerberus, this was the original thing, which was like, I can do comm nets really well. And they had like 3x3s and 5x5s like on the board. And so like that will of course be more power efficient. And there's a lot of companies that are trying to do this grok and stuff like that. But the intelligence per flop, I actually think is a tractable problem. The sample complexity, I don't think is a tractable problem. I think we don't. That's like we.
Well, that's crude.
Tell me about. Well, no, that's why it's like we got to try a lot of filaments, and like see which one lights up when we send electrons through it. Like that's what we got.
You mean it's intractable in the sense that it's hard? That's like you need to do.
I can't tell you. Here's a path that will work with high probability.
God, I thought you it's literally impossible. Like, well, okay, should talk about this later.
No, I mean, it's like I can clearly see line of sight from here to there with some like plus or minus 50% on schedule. Like I can probably but sample complexity, it's an algorithm issue. There's some amazing algorithm happening in our brains that is going to be some part DNA. That's 3.5 billion years of random search. That and there's a light amount of training that happens from that init that's not going to be Xavier. And what is it? And how is it trained? And like you look at ArcAGI 3, for example, and I'm
for a PhD. You should consider it.
Yeah, I'm thinking about it. And I literally have like agita. I have like fear in my heart when I look at ArcAGI 3. I'm like, I have no idea how to solve this. And it's like premised on like a 3-body problem where like, here's a helmet and you pop up into this game. What's the game? You don't even know what the game is. And it's like, how do you even start? I can't just RL my way through this, and RL doesn't even work. And so like, we don't have the tools yet. And so that's back onto the AGI argument, like, even defining it. I think we're still even, maybe that's the Einstein thing of like, if I had an hour to chop down a tree, I'd spend 59 minutes sharpening the axe or like figuring out what question to ask. And that is really the point, is that we don't even know the questions to ask yet. And even François Chollet will say that if we solve AGI 2 or 3, it's not saying that we have ArcAGI. It won't actually say that. It's not a litmus. It's like it means that we're getting closer to even answering the question of what is our AGI, right? And so, but yeah, sorry. What do you think about this?
I have nothing to add.
Okay, I did want to double click on it. Was something you said about like think about AI as a tool. There is this cool paper that kind of talks about what's the right framework to think about AI. Is it a tool? Is it a collection of people? Is it a new species? And is it in a first order approximation to us? And then it brings up all these moral questions about like, and this is where all the EA people get all excited about like, what should you turn off the computer? Is it immoral to turn off the computer? And I've heard rumors of Ilya having an effigy when we burn down a weight file, when we go from GPT-2 to GPT-3, and having a funeral, things like that. I don't know. What do you say to that?
Yeah, I don't know. We had this conversation a year or two ago, roughly around this, and I've always been more on this side that I think of it much more as a technology that we'll use to build tools. I'm sort of a little bit further away from thinking of it as a being, a substitute to the human. Like I don't see it yet. And you, I'm curious, you were much more on that side, maybe 24 months ago, and then how's it played out for you?
I think I'm still probably mostly with you on this one. I mean, I continue to believe it's probably possible to build machines that are more than that. The way that the current machines behave suggests that they probably understand something about like how we think about emotions, for example. Like they can clearly reason about them, but I doubt that they experience them. But it's unfortunately one of those like, there's only kind of two hard like philosophical questions in my mind, like meaning of life and quality, and like this is the second one, so I don't really know.
I mean, it's okay. What's Ben like as a roommate?
He plays the cello at midnight,
Okay.
which is sometimes great, sometimes horrible.
And he's
When he's horrible. I find that no, he's good, but it's sometimes you're like, wow, really that wasn't on my. You come back from work, you think, wow, work's so crazy, this AI world.
Yeah.
And you get home to and give you a lullaby to go to sleep. You understand, that's where the real craziness starts. But we'll be playing the cello and talking about all the things that one can't talk about on a podcast about starting a new company. But so no.
What about Oskar?
Oskar, so I actually feel I have the back living situation in the entirety of San Francisco. I actually think I can make a case that nobody is better. Maybe party ever can come here. Yes, it's tonight actually. Okay, I didn't know. See, it's great. You see who's in charge of the household. Yeah. So
Invite got lost in the mail. All right, what's happening?
did I say okay? I said it. So you're very much welcome. Depending on how the podcast goes. No, so the reason I feel my living situation is the best is that we have this beautiful 4-story house on the Filbert Steps for 4 people. Swallow is usually in New York because he's setting up the Cursor office there, I believe. Oskar works super late, so I see him, very briefly, but he usually goes straight to the living room and go to bed. So I basically never see Oskar. My brother stays with his girlfriend, so I have the entire place to myself. On top of that, Swallow's too lazy to send me his bank info so I can pay him rent. So I've lived there for 3 months. I haven't paid any rent. And then also, Swallow also hires the cleaners to from who I believe do the Cursor office to also come to our house several times a week as well. So I live there. I don't pay any rent. I have the house to myself, and the thing is cleaned for me a couple times a week.
And your favorite meal is $8.50 at Mongolian barbecue over there.
Exactly. It's like
not expensive.
what more do I want for life? Food life, sharp life. That's right. Let's just say sharp. That's exactly sharp.
Well, let me open it up to questions. There's a lovely audience over here. Can you guys have any thoughts, any questions for the team?
I guess my question is probably about the roadmap. And because you said a lot of it is bottom up. And in that case, I could imagine that you might not think about it because I'm not sure how big a piece of what you do every day is infrastructure. But it seems to me like a logical next step for Cursor would be solving infrastructure. Like, how do you build an agent to fix infrastructure issues? So now you can have a service, it deals with code, and then you could think about, it can probably write something of Terraform code, but there is just so much, all your configs and your secrets, and there's so much going on in your big infra. To even think about it as something potentially, to be solved.
We have thought about it, and there's a couple of other teams that are working on this. I will say it's a little bit. It's not something that we're actively working on right now. But we have come across it, and we're kind of thinking about it. Yeah. But if you have very specific ideas here, you should send them over, and don't start a company around this. Too bad.
That actually brings up a question I forgot to put in the list, but I did think about this a lot. If you guys remember why Microsoft bought GitHub, the idea was if we have GitHub and we're Azure, and I can control where you do CI/CD from, then I can control where you deploy it to. And there'd be an argument why you do that. But if GitHub is no longer the access point, if it's actually either Cursor or it's even up level from even that, and it's Figma, and all I'm doing, I'm making the mock-ups, and I may have some text description of what's going on.
Be careful now what you say, because maybe the stock price will soar on your word here on Figma.
Dylan, you can thank me later. I have no positions in Figma or Microsoft, to be honest. But it's interesting on how you think Satya has updated that prior, and what he's thinking about that.
Gosh, I know. Yeah.
Well,
What do you think?
I feel I can say things because, to be clear, I have no formal relationship to Cursor. I'm just a friend of the company, so I can say whatever I want here.
Yeah, go.
I think there are fantastic business models that are underexplored here around, for example, advertising on the technology stack. So, for example, day-to-day's company
Ads on Cursor.
Yes, but do it under the hood. I want to set up a new web app.
Right.
And I want all the database companies bidding through Cursor to be the ones that are used to power that app.
Yeah.
Because the database companies would, hey,
He's like, no.
we're not playing a date. Well,
I mean, the chances that like, I don't know Fiji, the now head of, she was VP of mobile. Now she was CEO of Instacart, and then she is now running all of what is it, applications or and so what did she do as VP mobile at Facebook? She threw ads on Facebook in a really elegant way that wasn't just banners. What did she do at Instacart? They had no ad revenue. Now like 50% of revenue is ad revenue. What is she going to do at ChatGPT? Like it's just a matter of time. I actually surprised it took this long to even happen.
And there's a good structural reason for this also, which actually I think is underappreciated by the industry, but I think this is it, which is that, and I'm actually not endorsing the ad thing. I hope you guys don't do it because I think it'd be bad for your users. But
I agree.
so I don't actually want you to do.
Please don't do ads.
But it's interesting from a business perspective. So the thing that makes ads so wonderful is that the costs get aggregated by the consumer, so that the pricing structure becomes opaque. And so, Google makes on average something like $800 per user per year in the United States.
So that high?
Yes, it's of that order. And the thing is, like when you use Google, you have no idea that you're paying this tax on every good that you buy that happens to be recommended through Google. You actually are. The companies that are advertising Google presumably must pass those costs on to you somehow. Like they're not clearly paying for it all themselves. But if you look at Google's own reporting on this, Google will say that they believe they drive $2 of revenue for every dollar of advertising that they make. And that's an insane number. That means that half the cost of the stuff you're paying for the internet is just the cost of Google advertising.
Right.
And so what of course makes this very difficult is that if I, go use Bing or something, and Bing is willing to charge less for advertisers, which they actually do, they do charge less for advertisers. I have no incentive as a consumer to do this, even though if the world shifted to this new equilibrium, like it would be better. So you have this gigantic coordination prisoners, charging the content that incentivizes, it to be all in the state where because it's all aggregated and everyone pays everyone else's advertising costs, no one has any incentive to lower these costs, and thus it's an amazing business.
Yeah.
It's interesting that this actually connects to the founding history of the country, that the reason why
Good segue.
so the founding fathers discouraged tariffs as a mechanism because they felt that it was more opaque than direct taxation, and that they wanted people to understand the degree that the government was taxing them, not to do it habitually.
And if you go even further to the Old Testament, it actually say
It's the second time you referenced the Old Testament today.
because if you think about it, no, I'm just kidding.
All right. What else? Any other? Yeah.
I guess I'm just curious why you guys decided to release your own model. Congrats on that, by the way. But what was the decision to do that? And what were the hardships?
Yeah, I mean, it's just we felt like there was kind of we tried all these different agent models, and they're obviously fantastic, but you have to wait for an answer for so long. And it is kind of remarkable. You go and look at how people use some of the agent CLIs. They'll literally sit there and wait and watch the model do the thing. They'll be like, so what are you doing? I'm watching the thing. And we felt like that was kind of weird. And we thought about whether there could be a different mode where it was just much, much faster output. So you could have this inflow experience. And then we kind of tried to figure out how to do that. And we just really worked very hard on getting models to be really fast. So we felt like it could be, would be something differentiated that would allow you to do a different type of coding. Yeah.
And I guess, are you guys going to try to get into because I guess I use Cursor. I love the tabbing aspect of it. Or are you guys going to try to get into the Claude code aspect where it's kind of these aggressively read through the code base, thinking, which I guess you said you don't want to have the fine, but this is kind of a separate direction, but is that something you guys are planning to look into?
I think we can, I think in theory we have, you could do stuff like that in Cursor today already, but as evidenced by your question, those
I was gonna say that exists.
Yeah, that exists, but can be better, as you sort of pointed out implicitly. So the answer is yes. I think Cursor should be or could be the place where you just do all, you do all these different types of coding. that being said, I think over the next 5 years until the end of the decade, there will be many more kind of different product form factors around software engineering. We might not be like the company that will, invent all of them, but we will work really hard in integrating them into the product we have, and that's very much something we're trying to do. Yeah, we don't have like an ideological belief of like we shouldn't do that because whatever. Yep. Yeah. If anything, we've always been very like, I shall not name all the competitors, but there have been a number of competitors that over the years have said, I would never do like cursor tap or something. Like we'd never do code completion because it's just going to be the agent. So we don't disagree that that will be important, but at every given point, I think we as Cursor try to look at the technology and figure out what the most useful way of integrating it is. And so that will just continue. We're not very ideological around like what the form factors would be. In fact, we think, we obviously started with the IDE. We are expecting to disrupt ourselves there. We don't think the IDE is going to be the final form factor. We also don't think it's just going to be sort of the CLI kind of natural language agent. So we all have to experiment much more.
Yeah, I was wondering, so besides a better user experience, are there any new coding features that having faster and faster models will unlock in coming years?
I think one thing that will be really important is just reviewing code. So just kind of generate all this code, and you'll have to figure out what you want to keep. I mean, there's really two sides to it. There's the model's getting better at understanding like the context and your intent, and like what do you actually want to do, and generating like creating more towards like your eventual, like your goal, like what do you want to build, and then also you steering and giving feedback and deciding whether the output is actually what you want. But like that code review feature, I think, is something that's going to become much bigger.
There's so much talk about like this gen verifier gap. This is like the Noam Brown whole discussion dialogue, and it's like anything where it's very easy to verify a unit test, very hard to generate the code that will pass the unit test, and that allows recursive self-improvement up until AGI. Why is it wrong? Why is that not going to lead to AGI?
Well, so I'm not the biggest believer in AGI in the first place. I'm not sure. I genuinely am always suspicious of this idea that you're just going to automate coding and it's just going to iterate itself to AGI. And I think there's a lot of pieces of research that like have nothing to do with what we do at Cursor. Like a lot of your work is not actually like generating the specific code, but it's like having, I actually don't know what you do. I don't think that I don't agree very much. What do you think? I mean, I do agree with your conclusion here, although you are unique and special, and that's right, exactly. That was the main point you were making almost every morning. It's actually how I get out of bed in the morning. So I think I agree with the conclusion, both for the high level reason that Oscar's saying, but actually also for somewhat more tactical reasons, where I guess I can't say too much on this, but having actually now gone and better understood how the RL stacks at these companies work, I'm kind of underwhelmed, honestly, by the pitch of like, oh, we can saturate any eval that we can come up with, because the way that they saturate them involves a little bit of like, guiding it to the answer, then helping it do it over and over again, shall we say. I won't say anything more specific than that.
I mean, that's the entire GroupO thing. Like if the way GroupO works is, the reward minus the expected reward divided by the standard deviation of the reward for the batch, for the group.
Yep. Exactly.
And if it's a task that it gets zero trajectory on, zero reward on every time, it's 0 minus 0 divided by 0. That ain't good. It doesn't work. And so it has to SFT to even be able to do it. And then you have to exactly.
So you end up with those kinds of things. And it's almost, you can tell that you're a strong competitor. I mean, if I thought everything was good, I wouldn't be doing my own stuff. So it's true. Maybe I'm biased here in some sense as well on that. So I'm happy to admit that. But yeah, at the end of the day, I guess the way I think about it is that being able to generalize well, which I think we agree is one of the important pieces that's needed, requires having very good representations about the world. And that I actually worked on RL back in 2017 before it was like, the whole LM stuff. And like the benefit of people who did RL in 2017 is that they saw that it doesn't fucking work. That it's like a terrible set of techniques that is done by people who have no other choice.
They figured that out way before 2017, man.
That's true. Sorry, you're right. It was a bit
known them since 2012.
I was late to the party. But of course, anyone who's done it before language model sees that. So then you go and you have language models on top, and with language models, it like looks a little bit better. And in fact, some of the reasoning stuff I think generalize at least a little bit. So I don't think there's zero value there. I think there's non-zero value. But on the whole, you basically are papering over the fact that RL sucks at building good representations.
Right.
By the fact that language models already have built really good representations from very broad unsupervised pre-training. Yeah. And I think that is like the right paradigm, that unsupervised pre-training gives you good representations, and RL is useful in very specific ways. It's very useful for task specification, for example. So like the RLHF that's used to make models aligned and useful for humans is like very good. I'm a fan of that. I don't think the RL is the important part of that. I think the alignment is the important part, but like it works. It's a fine technique in that respect. So I don't have any problems with RL with the task specification. I just don't think it's going to bridge those particular gaps. If I were to give sort of the most unkind frame, which is actually probably further than I believe, like there was a lot of effort over the 1980s through even the 2000s that kept still trying to do it, about building these expert systems, when it was like, oh, let's just go collect how all of the experts in the world think about everything and build these gigantic rule-based systems. And I mean, they could solve any eval that you threw at them, because you'd sort of go and like build those rules into the thing and like, look, you can do this then. And they were totally useless in practice. They weren't that useful. I do think that the current paradigm is a lot better than that, because the glue of language models to paper through and kind of interpolate between those things is a lot better than like just pure symbolic rule-based systems. But it's still, I don't know, I still look at it a little bit like the directional pitch here is like, we're going to go buy all of the world's data, and then, we'll know how to do everything the world does. Like, I'm not totally sold on that yet.
I completely agree. I mean, like, what percent of the internet have you read?
I mean, in my case, it's a lot, but in you guys.
Compared to the LLM. I mean, it was just like, and we still generalize better. And it's just like, what? Why are we not like taking a big step back? I mean, I don't think RL is like the problem. I think, well, I don't think RL,
It's a problem.
I think RL is the right problem to go after. It exposes that we don't have the right solver and we don't have the right architecture. It's not that RL is terrible. It's that we are terrible at RL. And RL,
I think RL is terrible. I'll actually go further.
okay. Well, here's some people like to cast RL as like another application, as like, we have text, we have voice, we have coding, we have computer vision, and we have RL. That it's actually not the case. I think RL is like is a structuring of a problem to not require besides behavior cloning, which is actually, I would call supervised learning, but it isn't in most RL textbooks, is learning without labels. And so how do I learn without labels to achieve maximize reward?
Yeah, but it is learning. I mean, it both is and isn't learning without labels. I don't know. I sort of hear you on this, but on the flip side, it also looks like weak supervision with basically just a reweighting. Like a policy gradient is a supervised, it is a
supervised against the environment. And so it's
supervised with the existing policy. Yeah.
Well, I'm improving my policy. Yeah, I'm improving my policy against the policy. But the policy gradient is the best direction to achieve more reward next time. That is the best direction to move the weights. And it just gets stuck. And I think it's largely this. This is my posit, and we've had whiteboard discussions of this, but maybe I've not said it in this way, is that the lineage of like almost all of what we're doing today, I was just talking to Catherine about this, is like, comes from optimization, where mostly we were trying to solve linear optimization, then we were trying to solve convex optimization, and we just kept the same tools in theory and said, well, it's locally convex. And so like, maybe that works, but what if it isn't? And most of RL is 0-1 lost landscapes. Either you get eaten by a lion or you don't. Either you get into Stanford or you don't. Either you meet at MIT or you don't. Either you start the company or you don't.
Get eaten by a lion, get into MIT.
Either you reproduce or you don't. Like, what is the objective function of life? It is reproduce before you get eaten by a lion.
Get into MIT.
Like, get into MIT. And that's massively 0-1. And that, unfortunately, is not convex, or not even like Lipschitz continuous. And that's where our optimization frameworks stop. And if you think about, and like there's hacks to get around this. If you hit it with a probability, then it becomes a little softer and we can start to have a little bit more gradient.
Sort of relaxation.
There's relaxation stuff that we do, but even a saturating, if you zoom out in your Desmos, you keep zooming out, a sigmoid looks like a 0-1. So it actually doesn't solve it, right? It's not actually getting you there. And so we need new solvers that will get us the rest of the distance and like not just throw in the towel on, well, robotics will never work because the robotics is mostly RL. So just give up. No, I think it's like, okay, well, we clearly can't solve these problems the way they're posed. And we need more efficient solver, but we can do it. And I agree with the unsupervised learning bit. Getting to representation helps reduce the search space. And so I can squeeze it into a more compressed search space, and then I can do RL from there. And so like that's the unsupervised learning, I'll call that DNA. And I can see the point that like the pre-training step is DNA. And then from there, we still need to get the rest away. And GroupO is not it. It's the best one we found, but it is not it. And it's not the algorithm that's going to get the rest of the distance.
Okay, so
It's like a lab lunch.
on that point, I mean, I'm also pretty skeptical of the DNA piece. It is certainly something important that's going on in DNA. It's necessary, but so DNA overall, you got about 3 billion base pairs. So at 2 bits per base pair, right? So you have something like a couple hundred megabytes, at most 750 megabytes of data. Now, okay, how much of that is brain related? Well, first of all, we are 92% the same as a cat. You're 98% the same as a chimpanzee. So the deltas there, in terms of what makes humans especially good learners, are not that large. They're probably tens of megabytes at most. So it is true that an infant is born with a quadrillion synapses that have yet to be potentiated, but the amount of structure in that is, the source code is actually quite small there. I don't think you need to do very much of it.
The difference between post mid training and like post RLHF is like most weights don't move. And so like, it's not about the percentage. It's about finding which weights to move and how much to move it. And so it doesn't need a lot of movement. Like that doesn't tell me anything. If it was 99.9% the same as a cat, there's still some difference between us and a cat. And like, we're really sensitive to those, very small few parameters. And like, that's all, we need to find that. And so,
sorry, I agree with you that that 10 megabytes of source code is important. My point is that I don't think it's right to analogize it to pre-training. I would analogize it to like the architecture search. You still have to do the pre-training of the baby. Like the baby is not just doing RL once it's born.
Right.
Yes, there is RL going on, probably in the basal ganglia. Like that's probably where the RL is. You actually see sort of experience replay like stuff that's going on there that looks like you're taking a policy gradient. Yeah. So I'm actually probably more bullish that policy gradients are a piece of the puzzle than you are. I actually think that it's probably less wrong than you do, despite the fact that I have a general dislike of RL. Like I actually think that piece of it is okay in that case. To me, I view it much more as just like RL is a very specific tool in the toolbox. It is an overused tool. RL is best done as like, the cherry on top of the sundae, but like it should not be the body of the sundae. The body of the sundae has to be all unsupervised to build the very best representation possible. And then you just do this little bit of RL that helps specify the task that you want. And that gives you a little bit of magic that you need. I don't think that you want RL as like one of the core training loops that makes the thing work.
I don't think that's wrong. But that cherry is not, it's a bad analogy, and that's the Jan LeCun one, but I think it's critical to get it to work. Yeah.
Oh, there you should really do.
So the cherry is the RL, the frosting is supervised, and the cake is all unsupervised. And that's Jan's entire thesis. But
I like his metaphors. I do it.
It's white. But like clearly we're coming out of the womb, batteries included. Okay. Like the deer comes out, can already walk. The squirrel separated from its mother at birth can already figure out how to bury acorns, even knows what an acorn is. So battery is already included in this thing, right? And what differentiates humans versus the rest is how quickly we can solve an RL problem and get to really good performance as per ARC AGI2. I think that is like, how quickly we can generalize, and it might be one base pair difference. Like that might be the case.
How young are babies that can do ARC AGI2? I don't know.
It's a good question. That's a pretty good question, to be honest.
I think that we could test this hypothesis. Under my hypothesis, children would have to be at least a couple of years old before they can do it.
The brain isn't formed yet, so the algorithm isn't even up and running until some point. I mean, I have my thesis on how the brain is structured and then how it's like mapped to an active critic and things like that, but like, whatever. For the next podcast, we got to wrap up. Any last questions? One more before we go, or you guys?
actually have to run.
Okay, let's get it done. Thank you so much.
Thank
It
you
was
for having
very fun.
us.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
So that's
all right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's give a round of applause.
That's it.